for these fish that split off after the asymmetrical tail of the sturgeon, which is also something you see on a shark. So, you know, a long history. This body shape has worked for 150 million years. That's you know, a real success evolutionarily. If we look where are lake sturgeon found historically, this is sort of the area, Great Lakes right in the center of that, but their range really stretched up north all the way to Hudson Bay and James Bay. You know, this area in the last ice age would have been covered in ice down to the Wisconsin and Great Lakes area. So you can actually look at the lineage of these lake sturgeon in the Great Lakes and throughout their range. And there were sort of, when the ice was down, sturgeon were hanging out in the Mississippi River to the south, the Missouri River over here, and then basically the sturgeon that came back to recolonize the Great Lakes after the Ice Age finished were coming from the Mississippi River, and then the Missouri River up here kind of, I don't want to break your screen, came down and filled in this northern part, including Lake Superior. Biology of the sturgeon is pretty interesting. They are, and I'm going to plug a video that we have here. I made a bit.ly, so bit.ly WI sturgeon, all lowercase. It'll take you to this page that we have, Explore the Lake Sturgeon, and this is really a hands-on. One of Stella's siblings we use to do a fish dissection, a lake sturgeon dissection video with sort of expert fish biologist John Lyons. You might see John Lyons' name on a lot of these pictures because he took a lot of pictures that we were able to develop into a fish ID page on our Wisconsin Sea Grant page. But there's lots of great stuff. I encourage you to watch that video if you really want to see up close what the inside of a lake sturgeon looks like, what the biology is. You learn a lot from that. So sturgeon live a long time. That 6 foot, 10-inch sturgeon from the Detroit River was over 100 years old. They live a long time. That means they can have many spawning events over their lifetime. I've got lots of good spawning pictures because you can go up to the Sturgeon Trail near New London on the Wolf River. You can see these fish just a few feet away from you spawning. They don't care where they're. It's pretty cool to see. Because they live so long, they don't spawn every year. They might come every so often, depending on if they're ready to spawn that year or not. The males will mature earlier, 12 to 15 years, and then the females, it takes a little longer, 18 to 27 years before they first mature. So these are not only long-lived fish, but also they're not maturing for a decade or even 2 decades. So, when we start talking about kind of the current status, what's happening with sturgeon, that's an important factor in restoring sturgeon. It takes a long time. They spawn in the spring. So when the water hits about 10 to 15 Celsius, they are ready to spawn. They've moved upstream. They will move hundreds of miles to go to the spawning habitats. They actually kind of home back to where they first spawned. And if we look at this sort of general view, we've got our large adults here coming into spawn. They produce a lot of eggs. A female sturgeon, as she gets larger and older, will produce more eggs. So we're talking tens of thousands, but up to hundreds of thousands, 600,000, even potentially over 1 million eggs. So they produce a lot of eggs. Not a lot of those eggs make it. But once they get through that embryo and larval stage, when they hit juvenile, early juvenile, and then regular juvenile stage, they're pretty good shape. They're going to survive for the most part naturally. So that is sort of the biological strategy here. Lots of eggs, only a few are going to make it. But if you produce 1 million eggs and a fraction of 1% make it, that's going to be a lot of sturgeon. In terms of their diet, they will also travel for food. They will go where the food is, and they're sort of a variable feeder. They will feed on what's abundant, but they really kind of prefer these small-bodied, soft-bodied invertebrates. So something like midge larvae in Lake Winnebago can be a really important food source. So even this giant fish eats these tiny little aquatic invertebrates. That's most of their food. And again, you can kind of see, if you look at their body shape, they're benthic. They live on the bottom, they feed on the bottom. They're kind of this robust form. They use those barbels to go along the bottom. When they detect that food, they'll actually eat that. And this is a great video. This is a small sturgeon, but we're going to watch its feeding activity. So watch, it's going to slow down. Here it goes. Boom. That's how they eat. They actually, almost like this vacuum cleaner action, their jaws will detach. That mouth goes out. They just kind of suck up the stuff on the bottom. You can see in this case that sucked up a bunch of rocks from this aquarium. Those weren't good food, so they spit them out. But they're basically vacuuming along the bottom of the lake, eating those invertebrates. So that's, in general, kind of the biology of this species. Now we'll talk about sort of where sturgeon have been in the Great Lakes area, in this area, and get to today. And then I will pass it off to Dave and Brad to talk about kind of current things that are happening. So really, as long as people have inhabited the shores of the Great Lakes, sturgeon have been an important food source. The Menominee people especially, really relied on the return of the lake sturgeon each spring. This was sort of the first, winter's been hard. You've used all your preserved food. Maybe you've hunted a bit through the winter, but then in the spring, these large fish, this fresh meat swims up and if you've ever seen them spawning, it's not hard to imagine. You just kind of, spear them from shore and you've got a lot of meat, a lot of fresh meat. So they were harvested many different ways, speared, netted, and trapped. And still today, the Menominee Sturgeon Feast powwow is something that will happen in the spring. So, still an important food source, culturally important. So if we look at Great Lakes sturgeon, historically much more abundant than they were today. And really the decline starts in the 1800s. Initially they're kind of treated as this nuisance. So commercial fishermen are out, they're trying to catch lake trout and lake whitefish with gill nets. These big sturgeon get into their nets, they roll over. There were some reports from some of the rivers where the sturgeon were so abundant that, the fishermen would be out in their boats and they'd almost be overturned by these abundant sturgeon. So, really treated as sort of a nuisance. Those sturgeon are used for pig feed or fertilizer, buried in fields or just thrown back, not really effectively used. They were eventually just kind of stacked. This is the quote, you'll see it everywhere, stacked like cordwood on the shore. And then because they were so oily, they could kind of dry them out and burn them as fuel in steamships moving up and down the Great Lakes. That was, sort of up until 1860. Then there was a shift. Then people realized with the first opening in Sandusky, Ohio, of the first lake sturgeon processing facility in 1868, that, hey, this is actually a very valuable fish. It was used smoked. You could smoke the meat, you could eat it fresh. Caviar was produced from the eggs. And even the swim bladder was used to produce things like isinglass, which is used in the beer and wine industry. And really, they used sort of all the parts of the sturgeon, but they also were using a whole lot of them. So just this graph here in the lower right, showing from sort of the late 1800s of 8 million plus pounds of harvest each year, kind of rapidly dropped as they approached the closing of the 1800s into the 1900s to by 1908 on the right, it's like 400,000 pounds. So, from this nuisance consideration to overharvest fairly rapidly. It wasn't just fishing that kind of impacted these species, also things like dams. And we're getting our, imagine this is a video and it is showing the water moving. It's flowing, and there's actually some fish jumping. They're not, then a note jumps up, it says not sturgeon because they're actually salmon. This is Leland, let's see, I'm gonna restart. I'm not gonna try to play that video again. So dams are a really important or a really big impacting feature on these sturgeon as well, because you know, they are migrating upstream. They are going to that spawning grounds, and as dams are built, they cannot access that spawning habitat. So you know, damming of rivers really impacts sturgeon around the Great Lakes. Kind of the changing of the watershed and the landscape across the Great Lakes states. You know, land is cleared. It's originally forested, really great water flowing into the Great Lakes. It becomes a lot more turbid. There is, you know, the Great Lakes are used for a time as this kind of place to put your waste material. This is a paper plant in Lake Erie, but you can see just this foam that's flowing out. That is just 1960s era pre-Clean Water Act. You know, something Dr. Seuss wrote about right there. You know, not a great thing. And so, you know, pollution plus the siltation of the great habitat, plus the building of dams, plus the overharvest really impacts the fish populations, and certainly things like chemical spills and discharge still an issue today. This is just from last year. One of the steel mills on the southern end of Lake Michigan had this big chemical spill discharge, and you know, so still concerns out there. If we look at sort of the current status where we're at now across the range, a lot of yellows and reds here. Reds being kind of critically imperiled. There's some oranges which are imperiled. Wisconsin's in the vulnerable with Minnesota and Ontario and Quebec. So those are sort of some of the strongest lake sturgeon populations. Places like West Virginia, North Dakota really don't have their original lake sturgeon populations anymore. So, you know, not great news. I think for us in Wisconsin, I think we do pretty well, which we're going to hear about. And if we look across the Great Lakes region, what are sort of the most robust lake sturgeon populations? The Lake Winnebago system, Lake St. Clair, so that 6 foot 10 inch sturgeon came out of the Detroit River. So a lot of sturgeon up there. And then if we go past Lake Ontario down the St. Lawrence near Montreal, still lots of sturgeon there. So that is sort of the intro to the biology and to the history of the sturgeon. And now we're going to jump into the next section with Brad Eggold. He's going to talk to us. Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. Yeah, Brad Eggold. I'm a Great Lakes supervisor based out of Milwaukee, and sort of building on what Titus is talking about, a project that we've been working on since the early 2000s on rehabilitation of sturgeon in the Milwaukee area. Going to hit a couple of topics and points ranging from what we're doing and some of the work we're doing to assess how well our stocking efforts are ongoing, you know, in the Milwaukee River. As Titus said, one of the things that we looked at when we decided to embark in the Milwaukee River is kind of the features of the Milwaukee River. And historically, it was a huge wetland estuary area. If you know anything about Milwaukee, it's a confluence of 3 rivers are in there. And as Titus said, through trade and other activities, you know, a lot of that got degraded over time. So we haven't seen sturgeon there in quite a long time, but we figured now is the time to start working on sturgeon and maybe get some inertia to rehabilitate and continue work on the Milwaukee River to see if we can get sturgeon back and spawning in the river. Obviously, when you're talking about an urban environment like the Milwaukee River and others, it was heavily fished. Obviously, a lot of habitat degraded, and these numbers declined quite quickly. This is a picture of the North Avenue Dam that was present in Milwaukee, probably in its first stages in 1850. This is only three river miles from the mouth. So really close downtown Milwaukee. You can tell it's a huge dam. And there probably hasn't been any sturgeon below this dam once that was cut off, probably since the early 1900s. So what was once probably a very high spawning area for sturgeon really has been cut off since 1850 for that. As Titus said, the biology of sturgeon, he kind of went through it, long-lived, and a lot of maturity. And we took that into consideration. And one of the things that's helping us here is this 15 to 25 years of maturity. And we knew going in when we were looking at the river and the potential that we did have some time to work on some of these issues, mainly on connectivity, removing some dams, working on habitat, and working on some other projects as we stocked these fish and as they were going out in the lake and getting to maturity and then coming back to the Milwaukee. So it's allowed us to start the program and make some progress in those 15 to 20 year interim time period. And we've made some great progress. The main goals of the program were to stock fish because they weren't there and do some assessments as well as habitat work. And I'll start off talking about what we're doing for stocking the fish in this system. We're using a rather unique facility. It's called a streamside rearing facility. And you might just by its name gather what that's about. It's actually a little portable hatchery that's in an 8 by 20-foot trailer. There's about 6 or 8 of these around the Great Lakes. And the idea here is to use the river water that you're going to stock the fish in as the incubating water for the fish. That becomes a bit of a problematic when you're talking about siltation. I think you're not getting water out of a well like you might at a hatchery. But the idea here is to use these facilities so that as the fish are brought up on this Milwaukee River water, they imprint to that water source. They're out in the lake, as you saw from Titus, 20, 50, 100 years, but hopefully they'll always come back to the Milwaukee River to spawn. So we're using that water during their initial life stages for that imprinting facility. We do get our eggs from the Wolf River. So we go up there every year in April and collect eggs, fertilize them on site. And then we bring them back to this streamside rearing facility. And you can see the insides of the facility are like a mini hatchery. We have 4 raceways. These are the intake, the outflow from the Milwaukee River, dumping water in the tank. And we raise these sturgeon from egg all the way up to large fingerlings, we call them. So they're in this facility from about mid-April through the end of September. And then at the end of September, we stock the fish. So they're being raised on Milwaukee River water. We're partnering with River Edge Nature Center, which is about 15 miles east of Saukville, if you know, Port Washington area, if you know where that is. And they actually have volunteers that work in this facility each and every day. So they have a 3-person group on Monday, a different group on Tuesday, and they actually are responsible for most of the work in this facility, feeding the fish, cleaning the tanks. And without their cooperation and volunteers from this River Edge Nature Center, we wouldn't be doing this project. So they're in there from mid-April through the end of September. About 1 week prior to release, we mark the fish so that we know that they were in the facility. So we do that through what's called a pit tag. And this is the same kind of tag technology that's in your cat or dog. If it gets lost, they can scan it and a number gets released from the tag. It's a unique number to that exact tag. We inject it in this poor little sturgeon here. And then we also take one of its fins off so that we can tell that it came from the Milwaukee trailer. And subsequently in years to come, we can know exactly the age of this fish. And then at the end of September, we release these fish in downtown Milwaukee at an event called Sturgeon Fest with the help of River Edge Nature Center. And as I always like to say, it's the happiest day of the year for me. Everybody's happy. We've got a long line of people. We actually individually stock these fish one at a time. They go in a small ice cream container. Hundreds of kids come and stock these fish. They name them, they pet them, they give them a kiss. They stock them here. You can see these little kids here. It's a heck of an event. If you ever want to be in Milwaukee and come to this, it's like the last Saturday or Sunday in September. It's a great event. I love it. Like I said, it's the best day of the year for me. So how have we done over time? We've actually done quite well. There was a lot of angst and potential issues with using the facility, using Milwaukee River water, as opposed to how you normally run a hatchery. You can see the graph on the right. If you look at the large fingerling column, we're up over 18,000 fish that we've stocked, from the trailer. We've stocked a couple of other year classes and fish over time, but in total, we've stocked over 23,000 sturgeon since the inception of the program, which is in the early 2000s. So we've done a pretty good job out of the trailer each and every year, hitting our mark of 1,000 large fingerlings. So really excited about that. And it really shows the dedication of these staff members and volunteers at River Edge to make that happen. And this is a typical size, as Titus said, they can grow real large, but they do grow real fast. So they go from little tiny guys to this size by the end of September. And they're 6 or 7 inches by that time. And luckily for us, I think once we stock them at this size, there aren't too many predators out there that are interested in going after the sturgeon. So that's a good thing. So once we have them out there, we've devised a couple of assessments to determine how well we're doing for stocking. One of the assessments we're doing is a juvenile population assessment. We do this in and around, this is a picture of Milwaukee. So we set nets inside the harbor and outside the harbor with monofilament gill nets. And these are some sturgeon that we're catching. They're probably like 3 and 4 years old. Luckily, because of the body shape of the sturgeon, you can see the far right-hand side, they can sort of get caught in the front part of their body. And we're able to get them out of there, take a weight, take a length, see what kind of pit tags in these fish, and then release them. And they get released alive and swim away. So it's a great assessment. We've done great over time. Throughout the course of our assessment, starting in 2013, we've actually caught almost 180 juvenile sturgeon in and around the Milwaukee area, which to me is pretty astounding. You got a huge lake out there, and we're able to capture these fish through this assessment. So that's pretty cool. 143 have come from DNR surveys, and they seem to like the Milwaukee Inner Harbor for at least the initial stages of their life. And you can see over time, we've probably been averaging about 25 fish caught each year. We're doing this survey and assessment. As I said, they appear to be utilizing the harbor. We're getting pretty good growth rates. If you've ever been following the story of Lake Michigan and the other Great Lakes, we know that a lot of the food resources are going to the bottom of the lake with mussels. In this case, that's good for sturgeon. They live on the bottom, as Titus said. They're certainly growing fast. We're averaging about 4.5 inches per year. And we're seeing at age 6, you can see they're almost over 32 inches. And so these are actually growing faster and quicker than the sturgeon in Lake Winnebago right now out in the lake. So we're getting great size. And once they get into some of these, 15, 20 inches, there's really no predator out there that's going to bother them other than us. And you can see that for the most part, we're capturing age 2 to age 5. After that, they seem to be going out in the lake. They'll be out there, as Titus said, for maybe the next 100 years. And hopefully, in case of the females, every 4 or 5 years, they'll make their way back up the Milwaukee River, which would be great. We're doing pretty good on the pit tag. There's a graph showing in orange here the fish that we've caught that have had a pit tag, and the gray shows that they weren't contained in there. And you might say, well, that's not very good. We're only averaging like 60% of the fish we're catching has this pit tag. I will remind you, though, we're putting them in this pretty big tag and it's pretty small fish. So I think they're losing some of these tags over time. So we're only getting about a 60% retention rate of the marks, which is unfortunate, but that's the consequence of marking these fish when they're that small. So we're doing that for juveniles. This is typically done in the summer. We also have an adult recapture survey that we do in the spring as they're spawning through electrofishing equipment. And like any good supervisor, you make sure that when these fish get caught, you're on board the boat. So that was pretty cool. And these are some of the first fish in 2013 in terms of sturgeon that have probably been caught in the Milwaukee River since 1900. So, that's pretty exciting to see some of our early work on stocking. You can see this is probably about a 40-inch fish that came from some of the early stockings of our program. So that was pretty neat. We've gotten some other reports of fish in the Milwaukee River in 18, 19, and 20. Some Facebook posts of guys holding sturgeon. Unfortunately, as you might guess, what was the year that we had the most sightings? 2020. Couldn't go out there and sample. So there were like 12 or 15 swimming around. We're like, oh, I can't believe we can't get our hands on these fish. Couldn't do it. But luckily, we went back out in 2021 and we did see 4 fish we were able to get our hands on. They were from the 05, 7, and 10-year class, the fish that we stocked. And they were in that 50-inch range. Probably all males, although we couldn't tell at that time. They weren't quite ready to spawn yet. But we did get our hands on them. We hope to get, obviously, our hands on a lot more in the coming years. And obviously, this is fairly labor intensive. you gotta go out at the right time. You might have to get tips from anglers or people that are out there. We're seeing fish. Where are they? We don't know. We don't know when they're coming in, when they're leaving. So to combat that issue, we put in a pit tag antenna array. And this array is being used all over the Great Lakes to detect these small pit tags that are in the fish. As I said, these go in when they're about stocking, and this array can detect those tags, and we can read off the number from each and every fish that comes out. So we put this antenna right here. I think Dave's going to talk about a twin array that's in the Peshtigo River that just sits there and constantly monitors for these pit tags. So we installed this in August of 2021 through the help of DNR staff and some workers at Urban Ecology Center. Took us about 3 days to do it, and the big part of the effort was pounding this thing down, securing to the bottom so that storms, ice, large trees don't knock it out of the way. But we got it installed, and we put 2 antenna arrays out there, one upstream, one downstream, so we can detect movement of, are they going upstream or are they going downstream? And you can see that the detection range is about 21 to 27 inches. Luckily for us, as Titus said, where these sturgeon swim on the bottom, where is this array? On the bottom. So hopefully they swim right over the array. We can pick up the tag number and detect where these fish are. Interesting enough, when we put the antenna in, we immediately got hits from fish that we had tagged all the way back in 2012 and 2013. Some red horse and smallmouth bass. Not only were they detected, this is all cloud-based, so you can log in and see instantaneous hits from the pits that get detected by the array. Not only that, they can also tell us what part of the array that it actually got hit on, which will maybe give us information on where these fish swimming upstream and downstream for maybe some habitat work in the future. So we immediately got those hits in August of 21, and then this year we ended up having 120 detects off of 23 sturgeon that were found throughout the Milwaukee River. You can see most of them came, well, April 13th to November 7th were our detects. Most of those coming in April and May. And we hope that the use of this pit tag array will tell us when are these fish coming in to spawn. Then we'll maybe get crews together and go look for the fish at upstream other locations. At least we'll know from this array, how many fish are actually in the river at any given time. And I suspect certainly that these 23 fish will start growing year after year. At least that's the hope. And then lastly, and probably one of the more difficult aspects of the project is, what are we going to do about habitat? We know we have to do some work. Obviously, a lot of people before me and everybody working on the Milwaukee River for better water quality, reducing stream runoff, non-point source pollution. We know we have to do some habitat work. These are some shots from the Wolf River that's been done there. And there's been some preliminary work on the Milwaukee River from the Ozaukee County Fish Passage. And they've mapped out from the Milwaukee, which is down way at the bottom, all the way up past Port Washington. And the green areas are where there's some good habitat. Yellow is sort of likely, and then red is probably not very good habitat for sturgeon. So we're going to utilize this map, and we're doing some more mapping in there this year and trying to determine where can we do some habitat and where can we provide opportunities for these sturgeon when they come back in to naturally reproduce and get natural recruits coming out of the system. We're probably a bit of ways and a long ways away from that, but at least we're starting along those lines. And, luckily time is on our side with sturgeon, but we have to keep on moving. And with that, I'll pass it over to Dave for part 3.
Okay, thanks everyone. David Boyarsky, I'm the Eastern District Supervisor. I'm Brad's counterpart, but I work on Green Bay and inland waters. And so I'm going to bring it a little closer to home here. I'm going to talk about Green Bay sturgeon and the sturgeon in the Green Bay watershed. Yes, I have to have a big fish picture. It is a requirement.
You don't even have to do the Florida push with these guys. You don't have to hold it way out.
Oh, no. Would you want to hold that thing way out? I'm not going to hold that thing way out. That's actually on the Wolf River, but nonetheless, the Wolf River does flow into Green Bay, so they're all part of the same larger ecosystem. Okay, so here's Green Bay. These are the major populations in Green Bay. Won't show up on there. Okay, so Fox River, Green Bay down here, Oconto River, Peshtigo River, Menominee River. There are some populations being reestablished in the UP as well, but these are the main ones, and the main ones in Green Bay. Now, we're in Sturgeon Bay, obviously, Door County. It may seem like, oh, that's way over there. Always does to me, but that's 6, 8, 10, 12 miles for the most of those rivers. The fish that used to be here in Sturgeon Bay, the fish that are in Sturgeon Bay here now, likely are coming from these locations. Some of them maybe from Milwaukee and other places, but these are our close populations here. So we're going to talk about the Menominee River first. So there's a Menominee. I shot you across the bay, a little bit north, a little bit west. It borders Michigan, the UP, and Wisconsin. Historically, sturgeon were present up to about Sturgeon Falls, and there were some natural falls there that we think that they didn't go above. Currently, there's sturgeon in that entire section still, and I'll explain a little bit more about each of those sections. So first, I'm going to talk about the fishing season in the Menominee. There is a fishing season. There's enough sturgeon to actually fish for them, which is a testament to that they're actually doing pretty well. So I get a lot of questions about sturgeon fishing. The first question often is, can you eat them, or do people eat them? Yes, you heard from Titus that when people found out, they actually taste pretty good. There's a nice Wisconsin style smoked sturgeon platter there. And then the next question I often get is, what do you use for bait? And there you go. Chunks of night crawler or chunks of fish. That's what people typically use. The upper section is they allow harvest. One fish over 60 inches, pretty limited. There's like 1 or 2 fish that get harvested each year. Very, very small harvest. The lower section is all catch and release. And if you want to know more, it's not showing up on here. But Paul Smith did a nice article on this, the fishery in the Menominee River way back in 2016. But it's a good one to describe what's going on there for fishing. And so with the fishing season, with the population, of course, we have to do some management. And I want to talk about how we manage the Menominee River. So we do routine monitoring. We typically go out with an electrofishing boat. Won't go into details, but essentially the electrofishing boat stuns the fish. We catch them with a net. They're perfectly fine. They go back to swimming, but we're able to handle them, take a measurement, put a tag in them if they don't have a tag, check them for tags if they have a tag, and then let them go on their way. From that, we're able to track their growth, but most importantly, we're able to get population estimates and track the population size. Then there's also a lot of research on the Menominee River, particularly with movement and that as well. That's Mike Donofrio. He's the former supervisor over there who was the head biologist taking care of the Menominee River. And so there was a section of the Menominee River way up there in the very top that, all those dams, like Titus said, had split the river and the sturgeon couldn't move like they normally were supposed to. They were extirpated from that very, very top portion of the Menominee River, or at least we think they were. We couldn't catch anything more there. So we started stocking fish there, and we stocked it for almost 25 or so years. We've stopped stocking. We've met our goals. They're still out there. They're still growing. They haven't spawned yet, or we don't think they've spawned yet. Maybe some of them have. But that was part of the rehabilitation portion of that river. And I'm going to show you. We'll see if it works. I just had 50-50 with videos. Hey, it's working. Your moment of little sturgeon, they're lovely little things. Those are baby sturgeon going into the Menominee River. And many of those fish are still out there, and they're growing. And hopefully that's like I said, the upper section that we're trying to get that population reestablished. Okay, so let's go back down to the mouth of the Menominee River. So here's the mouth of the Menominee River. That's a mouthful right there. So if you go upstream, a little over 2 miles, you got a dam here, the Menominee Dam. That cut off sturgeon from heading upriver to their traditional spawning locations. Not a ton of spawning habitat, not a ton of rearing habitat here. And so in the not too distant past, over the past decade or so, a lot of partners have worked together to put a fish lift, an elevator in the facility, in this first hydroelectric facility of the Menominee River. And it's actually a lift where the sturgeon can swim into. It can pick them up, you know, you push the button, it picks it up, and the sturgeon come and get dumped into a tank with other fish as well. And then the crews are able to actually sort the sturgeon, whatever that needs to get passed upstream, so that they can put them upstream around. There's another dam in that picture. I don't know if you can see it. That's the Park Mills Dam. They got to go around that other dam, and then they have access to lots of river miles there. Like I said, a lot of partners. This is currently being run by the state of Michigan. So a lot of cool things happening on the Menominee River. So let's move a little further south to Peshtigo River, straight across the bay. So this is Peshtigo River, mouth down here, the town of Peshtigo. There's a dam in the town of Peshtigo. You got about 12 miles of river, a little bit more river to work with here as far as habitat goes. However, that lower section of Peshtigo River does not have a lot of spawning habitat in it for sturgeon. Majority of the sturgeon spawning habitat was by the Peshtigo Dam. If we haven't mentioned it before, sturgeon like rocks to spawn in. They lay their eggs in the rocks. The eggs go into little spaces in the rocks. The current pushes oxygenated water, keeps the eggs alive. The rocks keep the predators out. It's a perfect condition for baby sturgeon eggs. So they need rocks. So there's some rocks at the Peshtigo Dam. They can spawn there. There's limited amounts. So there's several places on the Peshtigo River where we've worked with landowners or the county to install more rock in that lower section as spawning habitat. And then as with the Menominee, we do surveys. Most of the surveys that were done are in conjunction with some egg take by Michigan. They come down here to get eggs out of the sturgeon to do their hatcheries, to streamside facilities like Brad was referring to Milwaukee. They got similar facilities in the UP. And so through these surveys, same thing, check for tags, tag the fish that aren't tagged, take lengths off the fish. We're able to build up a fair amount of fish that are tagged out there. And so just like the Milwaukee River, we installed a pit tag, a remote pit tag antenna in the Peshtigo River. So it's down below the dam, see the little yellow bars down there, and we're able to now detect fish going in and out. And what's nice about this is that you can, over time, you can track those fish coming back, so you know they're surviving, and you can track the populations. You can estimate population size by getting their recaptures of those fish. Okay, so we're going to skip down to the Fox River in Green Bay. So the first dam on the Fox River is the De Pere Dam. You got a little bit of river miles to play with here. You know, you're almost up to 7 miles, but I don't know if anyone's been on the Fox River. It's very channelized, very, very disrupted. It's not a lot of natural habitat in that lower stretch. And so we've always thought we're habitat limited here. UW Green Bay has been doing some recent monitoring and research on the Fox River. And in particular, Dr. Forsythe and his graduate student, Stephen Tucker, recently completed a thesis where they were looking, this is the De Pere Dam, looking below the De Pere Dam where the sturgeon are spawning, evaluating the success of those eggs. Are they hatching? Are the larvae coming out of the rocks? And what they're finding is that there wasn't a lot of hatching, and a lot of the fish that were coming out of the rocks were coming out too early, and they probably weren't going to survive. So something going on with the habitat, we suspect. And so that brings me to my next slide, and that's where we're really focusing on now. No concrete plans right now, but we're in discussions with partners on how to get more and better habitat here down below by the De Pere Dam. And so that's the focus of our efforts in the Fox River. So I hope with all these cool photos and our presentations that I've convinced you, or we've convinced you, that sturgeon are pretty cool. You heard a pretty bad, sad story about how they haven't done so good over time. But I think you can see, I hope you're a little excited about some of the conservation that's happening and some of the hope that we have coming forward for sturgeon. I am glad you came out, but I don't want to just leave you with this tonight. So I'm going to invite you out to take advantage and maybe see some sturgeon. I'm going to show you some opportunities on how to do that. So the first one is, I haven't talked about it, but if you go upstream in the Fox River, you have Lake Winnebago. Lake Winnebago has a big sturgeon population. It's like 30,000 fish. It's been sustainably managed since like the 1935. There's not many dams on the Wolf River and Upper Fox River, so they have access to their spawning habitat. They naturally reproduce there. There's very limited stocking. Stocking is just done for research purposes. And so we have a fishery there, and it's a spear fishery. Most of you have probably you've either observed it or seen it on the news. If you haven't been to the registration, you should go. Not only do you get to see lots of big fish and neat fish, but you can talk to us there. You can talk to the folks registering the fish. They'll tell you everything you want to know about sturgeon. They'll explain how we manage the population, all the different biology of the population. I used to bring, whenever I don't have to work, I bring my kids there. It's a great family event, and you learn a lot. So please do come on out for that. It's coming up here in a month and a half or so. And then I want to explain some other opportunities. Come spring, like Titus was referring to, there's a lot of places you can go look at sturgeon and see them spawning. So down around the bay, you can go over to Peshtigo River. They just recently built a nice platform over the river just below the dam. You can go over there and you can see the sturgeon come in there and spawn. You can also see muskies and walleye sometimes and suckers as well. But that's one location. Another location is just right down in the pier. They have a nice walkway right below the dam, and you can see sturgeon spawn there as well. And then last I'll put on here is the Wolf River. There's lots of different locations on the Wolf River where you can go observe fish spawning. This is just two of them, the Shawano Dam and Shyacton and Bamboo Bend, but there's other locations as well. And you can really get close to them, as Titus was saying. They come in certain locations anyways, they come in and spawn in the shallows. Let's see if my video works here. Hey, it does. That fin that Titus was talking about, look at that. Don't they look like sharks? And that's the Shawano Dam here. But if you hit it right, you can see this, and it's pretty neat. If you want to know more, go to our webpage. If you remember these links, great. If not, just go to the DNR webpage and type in sturgeon spawning, and they'll get you here. You can also subscribe to that webpage for email updates. And what we do is during the spring, we'll send out emails letting people know, hey, they're spawning in Shyacton now. They're spawning at Fox River, so people can get out and get to go see them. And so anyways, I'll leave you with that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. Okay, I have a ton of questions. I'm sure you do too. Yes. Great question.
On the Milwaukee River, how far up river can they get from Lake Michigan? North Avenue Dam is gone now, right?
Right. They could probably get for sure up River Mile 7. If you're familiar with Milwaukee, where Bayshore Mall is, there's a dam there. So if it's higher water, they get by that. Although they are planning we've had 2 dams removed in Milwaukee, and we've had a fishway put in at up at Deansville. And there's also a fishway planned at Clutch Park, which is straight across from Bayshore Mall. That's supposed to happen early next year. So once that's in place, and at Deansville, they probably have the right conditions to get up like 35 miles, all the way up into the town of Village of Grafton, where I live.
Cedarburg Dam, or is it Cricket's Craft?
Well, the Deansville Mequon Dam in Deansville at River Mile 20 also has a fishway around that dam. So there'll be 2 fishways around the dams plus 2 dam removals. And that's really exciting to see that they'll have access to whatever river miles they want to get into for spawning. So I'm really excited about that.
Is there any activity north of the Grafton Dam?
The village of Grafton Dam is probably there to stay for a time. Yeah.
There's been a couple dams taken out
Above there, yes,
above.
right. Yeah, but they will not be able to get around the Grafton Dam.
There's no population upstream from there.
No.
Okay, you had a question, right?
It was actually the same question.
Okay.
Yeah, hey, two questions. Number one is, we'll go out here and watch the salmon spawn and then they die. Now, these guys don't spawn and then die. They go on to come back and spawn like they're from school. I can't control that. And the other question is, what's the oldest sturgeon that you found in Sturgeon Bay?
And also, how do you age them? Do they have otoliths?
Well, they do. But what happens is, with those really old fish, their ages aren't real accurate. Because as they get older, the growth, let me explain. So what she's talking about is otoliths on fish bones, on fish scales. If you pluck them and you look under a microscope, it's kind of got growth rings like a tree. And because fish slow down growth in the wintertime. And sturgeon are no different. They slow down growth. But what happens is when the fish starts growing slower, those growth rings get really tight. And so when the fish is 50 years old or whatever, those growth rings are so tight that you can't really tell them apart. And so the accuracy starts going down when they get old like that.
Well, like humans, we get 39 and we start lying.
Yeah, to answer your first question, part of the reason they're long-lived species. Part of the reason why they were darn near extirpated from the Great Lakes from the early activities in the 1800s is they don't spawn every year. So females might be every 4 or 5 years, males every 2. So once you start looking at they don't spawn every year, you start withdrawing them, and pretty soon you have no sturgeon left, and that's what's occurring. So at least in Winnebago, I think the females like are on a 4 or 5 year cycle. We expect on Lake Michigan probably be in that same arena, but yeah, they continue to live after spawning.
Okay, so we're saying that Sturgeon Bay was named because there used to be sturgeon here, not because it looked like an elephant.
I think so. I'd say they were, historically they were pretty abundant here and were probably harvested.
But they didn't spawn here, did they?
They didn't spawn here because they probably.
Well, I've heard that one of the reasons that they weren't found as much here anymore was in the late 1800s, the canal went through to the lake, which made it a lot colder through here. Would that be true? Like warmer water? Warmer than the lake?
Well, if the fish hang out in Milwaukee, which is pretty cold, so.
Yeah,
That's a river area,
Yeah.
right?
it's hard to say if that was a contributing factor.
I think they're talking about tours.
And I think the canal coming through was the same time that, kind of harvest and dams and all that stuff would have been hitting them at the same time. So.
What you got to remember is I showed you some nice populations in Green Bay, but those populations are still just a fraction of what they were, 300 years ago. And yeah.
I lived on the shore down here between Sand Bay and on the rocks about 20 years ago. In the middle of the summer, I got a dead sturgeon in front of my boathouse. I called DNR. They were going, but anyway, the policeman from the park came out, picked it up, said they've been finding these dead along the shore of Door County. It was 48 inches. And then I never heard what it died. They were trying to figure out what it died of. It was just laying there. It was way up on the shore. Would that have been coming from one of these other lakes or rivers? Where would it come?
It could come from any place in Green Bay or Lake Michigan.
So they are there.
Yeah, oh yeah. There, if you walk out the door here and if you could look underneath the water, you probably would see a sturgeon.
Oh, they are.
Yeah. Fish die, we find them all the time, dead sturgeon. It's not like they die a lot, but they don't decompose very quickly. They float, and it could have floated all the way from Michigan. So eventually they're gonna wash up someplace. I guess it's good that you call, because we like to go out there, if they're still salvageable, we like to go scan them and look for a pit tag, because that gives us information that we know that, oh, that fish died and this is where we found it.
I never did hear it yet. They took it.
An anecdote, a question, and then an invitation. So last year I can't remember, a friend of mine just told me the story over Thanksgiving dinner. She was kayaking at Potawatomi and there was a 5-foot dead sturgeon just last year, the year before, right here. So I mean, they're definitely here. And I mean, 5 feet, that was a pretty large fish. I wish she had a picture of it, but she said it was, she was in kind of a short kayak, but it still was almost as long as her kayak. It was pretty good size. Curious about connectivity and dam removal, and what does it take? Is it, I understand, I get from your innuendo that the town of Village of Grafton is very anti, you're not touching our historic dam kind of thing. But we've got a dam in Green Bay limiting the upstream passage. We've got dams, even there's still a couple of dams before, sturgeon haven't been at Kashina Falls in over 100 years. The Menominee would like to have sturgeon back. What do we need to do, or what does it take, or what are the procedures to either get fish passages put in, and can any dam use a fish passage, or is a dam's up too high, does that make a fish passage impossible? So I just kind of maybe you could talk a little bit more about, are there other pending dams to come out? What can we as the public do? And then also, if anyone hasn't been to the Sturgeon Feast, Sturgeon Powwow is awesome. I mean, it is a community feast. It is definitely a celebration of life, and it's their New Year's. Like you said, it's wintertime. They've been hunkered down, all winter long, surviving through the winter. And when those sturgeon come back and they can walk down to the water and pick food out of the water like that, it's a pretty happy time. And they put on a feed that is second to none. Sturgeon are delicious. So go check out the Sturgeon Powwow. I can't recommend that enough. So anyway, thank you.
Sure.
Can I make a comment about the dams?
Yep.
It's an environmental trade-off on the Peshtigo, Yucano, and particularly the Menominee rivers. All but maybe one of the dams are power production dams. So you eliminate a carbon-free source of electricity. What's the trade-off? So when the dams get relicensed by FERC every so often, like 20 years, 30 years maybe, and they have to answer that question on trade-offs, and they have to answer the question, can we increase fish passage, or is it just too high of a dam? So those things are taken into account.
So I guess I'll answer it, but the short answer is that whoever owns the dam is mostly in control of what happens to that dam. And there is a FERC process, there's a Federal Energy Regulatory Commission that all these hydropower facilities are licensed. And that's how often we're able to work with facilities to put in different measures, whether it's downstream fish passage or upstream fish passage, that sort of thing. And there's trade-offs. You mentioned power generation, but there's also trade-offs on invasive species. Some of those dams are barriers to invasive species coming from the Great Lakes. So it's a complicated situation and they have to be looked at on an individual basis. But I showed you the Menominee Dam. That's a case where we're able to take sturgeon anyways and pass it around a Menominee Dam. But for instance, we're not able to pass whitefish because whitefish are VHS susceptible. They have a disease that we would be spreading upstream if we passed them. Sturgeon are not VHS susceptible. so we can pass those fish upstream. Same thing, you mentioned Kashina Falls. We have a fish passage project around the Shawano and Balsam Row dams, where we go there and actually catch them electrofishing, and we put them in our big tank trucks and we ship them up to Kashina Falls, and we let them go near Kashina Falls, and they're spawning there now. Eventually, most of them come back down, but we just do it every year, and that's the process. So case by case basis is what it takes for fish passage around dams.
There was a film I saw released in Kiwani at the salmon collection. So is that an official project now, or?
Yeah, I did briefly mention that there are these streamside marine facilities. There's about, I don't know, 8 to 10 around the Great Lakes. Besides the Milwaukee, there's one in the Kiwani River. And then there's 2 out of Michigan in the Cedar River and the Whitefish River, which is the upper part of Green Bay. And there's also one on the Kalamazoo and the Little Manistee. So those are the ones that are on Lake Michigan. There's some up in Lake Superior. I think I just read about one on Lake Huron. But yeah, we have that one in Kiwani that's doing the same thing we're doing, trying to release about 1,000 fish every year or so. Yep.
Okay, we'll do 2 more questions in person, and then Zeb has a few online, and then we'll let these guys get back home. Okay, yes.
Just 2 quick questions. With all those dams, I had the privilege of kayaking the whole thing a few years back, and I noticed there are a number of dams. So when you release some river edge, there's several dams in between. So are you finding that the ones you released are getting up to just going up to that first dam and getting, they just can't get any further, they're frustrated, or are they going to other rivers?
Right. Yeah, on the Milwaukee River, because of the, we're at like river mile like 55 where our streamside marine facility is, and there's a lot of dams to navigate. So we've chosen to stock these fish down below all those dams. We figure we were raising them on Milwaukee River water. They're sufficiently imprinted there. We can stock them probably anywhere, and they probably would return to Milwaukee. But we stock them in the lower part below all those dams. On your second part, we're just getting some returns now, so it's a little early to tell how far they're going to get. Can they navigate around some of these, through these fishways? We hope we've designed them properly so that they're low flow enough and they can get around them, but it's still a little too early to tell as far as the adults, how far they'll be able to get up the river. So come back in 10 years, we'll have an update.
Okay. My second question actually is, what do they taste like? I've never eaten.
What do they taste like?
I never had one either.
Sorry.
What a
What
meeting.
do they taste like?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I only went to the powwow this spring for the first time, so I don't know if it's the same meal every year, but it was smoked. And it was just like red meat or more fish-like.
It's dense.
Yeah, they're like dense, kind of like, I mean, it's definitely a kind of a meaty, kind of a, I wouldn't exactly say red meat, but I mean, it's definitely a meaty, dense fish. Yeah, like shark. I don't know. But it's not a flaky white. No, it's not a flaky white fish. But no bones. Well, I mean, I don't know what they do. Yeah, there's no bones. Yeah. Nice.
I have a question. Are there any citizen science opportunities to get involved with sturgeon research at all that you guys know of off the top?
Well, one.
Literally though.
Yeah,
There
well,
are 2 in the back here that I know for sure, and one in that corner. And Brennan was just here a second ago.
Well, I mean, I'll say get on the ground floor of rearing fish, at least on the Milwaukee, where, like I said, the day-to-day operations of the Milwaukee trailer are done all by volunteers. So we have, there's probably 24 to 26 volunteers that have been, some have been there since 2006. Every year they've been at the trailer 1 day a week raising these fish. So obviously it's a long way from here, but that's definitely an opportunity. They're always looking for more people to help out at the trailer. So
Yeah, and the juvenile release is fun. Like I did the Milwaukee one this year. You kind of adopt a sturgeon, and I did it. Took my kids to the Kiwani one a few years ago, and we have a certificate with the 2 pit tag numbers for those 2 fish we released. So
one day we'll tell you we hit them.
yeah,
Sure.
it'll be like, those are our fish. So you really get to take ownership of that fish.
The Sturgeon Fest for the Milwaukee is the last Saturday or Sunday in September. It depends on where that falls.
Speaking of those volunteer projects, Zeb has an online question.
can kids get involved in the program?
There are, at least on the rearing side in Milwaukee, there are some younger adults that work with their parents, and I've seen probably kids as young as like 8 or 10 helping their parents out at the trailer, which is super awesome.
Oh, my daughter's online.
So-
She heard you. So now I'm committed to going down there.
If you live in Michigan, there are some sturgeon in the classroom programs, I think in Michigan, where they have a sturgeon in their classroom and then they release it. So talk to Brad and maybe we can bring that here too.
All right. So
And I would just, I kind of hit it on in my presentation, but if you're interested, just come out and see them. That would be really a good step right there, and you get to learn about them and share your knowledge with others.
They are as phenomenal as they appear if you haven't seen them in person. I'm a Great Lakes guy, trout and salmon guy. Don't tell these guys that, but sturgeon is the coolest fish in Wisconsin. But you didn't hear that from me. It's not the Chinook.
okay, Zeb, who we got online? for
Okay,
questions?
so we got Brian Henriksen has asked, has there ever been a sustainable population of sturgeon in the East and West Twin Rivers, Manitowoc River, or surrounding tributaries?
I think from the information we have, undoubtedly, a lot of these major tributaries like that had sustainable populations back in the day. Evidence is hard, even for a big city like Milwaukee, when you start digging in the records to get really credible information. You're talking about anecdotal stories of, some newspaper article on April 20th saying, oh, so-and-so this area had these large fish, and then you're like, was that a sturgeon? You can't quite tell from the records what they were seeing, exactly where they saw it, but you can gather like, yeah, that must have been what was going on there. And I'm sure the same thing in a lot of these larger streams like the Sheboygan, the Manitowoc. No doubt, given how many were out there in the 1800s, I'm sure they were there.
Yeah, I think archaeologically, there would be a way to get at that because, people inhabited these rivers for thousands of years and they're, are probably but that's not an easy thing to just go out, get a number. They do have some bony parts that you can find, like the kind of sharp, pointy scoots, like those will turn up. So, but probably lower numbers than bony fish. So it's also a challenge.
Awesome. All right, you guys, thank you so much for coming up. Thank all of you for coming out. Steve said earlier, major thank you for our sponsors, Bridgeport Resort and Door County Medical Center, for all of the support for Speaker Series. Join us on Thursday, January 5th, when we are back with Door County Maritime Museum's own Brendan Christensen, who will be talking about the Berry Loon, a Door County vessel. Good night, you guys.
Thank you.
If anyone gets down to Chilton, there's a nature center there called the Ledgeview Nature Center, and they're supposed to be right there with Lake Winnebago. They've got a huge tank and they rear sturgeon there every year. So you can stand there with sturgeon right in front of your face and see sturgeon there too. So that's another place to go see them close up.
No, they're not in the south. Like they're
Okay.